I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector News Podcast. And I am on location in London, England at the Resourcing Tomorrow conference. And I have a guest from down under. We talk a lot. We've done lots of podcasts. And it's the first time we've actually done one sitting across from each other. So this is novel. I welcome back Dr. Dave Lawie from Imdex.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, it's great to do one face to face for a change, actually.
Yes, and not have to worry about, is it a day before or a day after in Australia from when I'm trying to schedule the podcast? We never seem to get that right.
No, I know it's difficult, but now we can both suffer with equal jet lag, so it's good.
Well, I suspect yours is a lot worse than mine. That's probably a bigger haul to here from Australia than from Charlottetown to here. But yeah, it's not the jet lag. This trip hasn't been fun. So before we get into today's conversation, let's, as always, give an overview of what Imdex is so people listening and haven't heard of you know what you are.
Yeah, so a mining technology company. We operate around the drilling space in exploration resource development, right up to blast hole drilling in the mine, and supply technology around that process. So one important differentiation is we do not drill the holes. We do not own the drill rigs, but we provide a lot of the infrastructure, digital infrastructure and equipment around that process.
Wonderful, which is a very nice lead into today's topic. We've been talking about the greening of the economy and through our podcasts. The first ones were kind of not doom and gloom, but it was talking about that there's a gap between where we need to go and where we are today, and essentially that was going to be problematic going forward. Our last conversation started to get a little bit more positive. We talked about the ways and means that we're going to bridge that gap to help us get to that green technology. And we're going to take another step down that road. So you as a mining technology company, we're going to discuss the role of technology in making mining more efficient so that we can bridge this gap again more quickly. So what is the role of technology in helping to bridge this? And let's start with existing projects as opposed to new projects. How can we make existing projects more efficient so that we're getting more of the ore that we needed out of them?
Yeah, so I think one of the dimensions people forget about when they're talking about technology applied to new projects or existing projects and improving them is time. For an economist and you're doing financial models, time is your master variable. The industry tends to forget about time sometimes when it's talking about technology, but we see technology being able to accelerate bringing resources into development, and those that are already in development being able to prosecute them far more efficiently. And that would come under for existing mines, would come under the general banner of a resource stewardship. And so, to supply the new metals that we need, a good place to start there is prosecuting what we already have in a far more efficient way. And that would come under the banner as well of precision mining, for example. Rather than moving lots of dirt and material around that we don't need to, rather than consuming energy to produce the metals that we're getting, excess energy to process materials that aren't relevant or detrimental, or need to go into the tailings pond and make that more of a problem into the future. Why don't we know more about the materials before they arrive at the plant, so we can apply technical decisions in the mining process to extract the good bits, and I use air quotes when I say that, extract the good bits and leave the bad bits behind, or at least understand where the bad bits are and be able to ameliorate their effect on the environment in real time using a tactical mining approach. Now, that sounds easy to do, but it's not. 10 years ago, when I would talk to the industry, I would talk to them about ore body knowledge and precision mining and things like that. Did not get a particularly positive response, or went into the big bin of unknown unknowns to a lot of people I was talking about. 5 years ago, that has changed, actually. So people talk about this quite a lot. And then there's actually been a desire expressed by many people in the industry to execute precision mining strategies, which is great. But then we'll talk and say, well, how? How can you execute a precision mining strategy where you don't know the deportment and location of the various materials in quite a lot of spatial detail in the stope or on the bench or whatever mining method you're using? So the only way to understand that level of variability to exploit it is to measure it. There's no way around it. You just need to measure it. You need to understand the spatial variation of where your ore is, but also where the bits are that you don't want to mine in great detail on the bench. Now, that is typically not done, but in mining operations especially, we have a way to access that information via blast holes. So if you're looking at an open cut mine or even an underground mine, the amount of production drilling that's done around the world is absolutely enormous. Every single day there are thousands and thousands and thousands of drill holes drilled into these materials. But we're familiar with doing measurements in exploration and resource development holes, not so much production holes. It's not something that's accessed or used. So there is a way, or you can put sensing equipment into blast holes and measure in great spatial detail the deportment of the various materials on the bench. And then if you know that, that gives you that optionality or technical ability to handle the materials in different ways. It is catching on in the industry. And, one thing that's in the public domain is Rio Tinto with their large iron ore mines in the Pilbara, for example. And everyone knows they run 300-ton trucks around and giant diggers and everything and 10-meter benches. But they're actually looking now at ways of exploiting the variability in the deposits to keep their grades higher, so to achieve their Pilbara blends as their mining becomes more complex with time, by understanding the deportment of the materials in a lot greater detail, running smaller trucks, 30 or 40-ton trucks, which can, by the way, be electrified far more easily than a 300-ton truck, and rather than mining 10-meter benches, mining 5-meter flitches, to actually extract it, to mine the same amount of material, but send to the train higher grade material and improve their waste rejection and improve their dilution problem that they have there. It's worth a mozza, of course. So if Rio, everything, talking about iron ore now coming out of the Pilbara, the benchmark is the Pilbara blend, and Rio Tinto set that. And so if you, when the mining gets deeper, they get into these channel iron deposits, which are really quite complex. Hitting that Pilbara blend is becoming a problem even for Rio, and this again is in the public domain. So they're now starting to think about this tactical approach to mining and precision mining and having the information they require to do that.
So from an environmental standpoint, then what the technology will do is allow you to get more ore with less waste and be able to actually operate with smaller equipment. So you have a smaller environmental footprint on a number of different fronts. Is there a cost savings to these mining companies as an incentive to be doing this?
Yeah, so it does bring about cost savings, of course, for an existing operation. But if you're planning a new mine that doesn't exist yet, and you take this approach, then you could perhaps cut your capital investment up front by half. You don't need, often the default in the industry is to design very large processing plants to cope. One way to do a variability is just to build a stonking great big plant, which doesn't really care too much what you throw at it, but they cost a lot and they still have trouble meeting their nameplate capacities. But if you understand the variability of the deposit, you can perhaps run a much smaller plant, deliver to it exactly what it needs, and not be feeding a whole lot of junk into it. So you don't need it to be able to process huge volumes of material to extract what you want. So you can improve the head grade. But the flip side to this, if you improve the head grade of the material you're sending to the plant, is it also means you understand what is not grade. And one of the issues mining has from an ESG point of view is how to treat the stuff which is not ore. And in the vast majority of mines, not so much the Pilbara I know we're talking about, but the vast majority of mines, we spent the most of our time blasting, digging and moving stuff that's actually not ore. And that gives the industry a problem. But understanding the characteristics of the material that's not ore, again, gives you optionality about what you do with that. And you can start to construct tailings dams or stockpiles, which when you know what you're putting into them, you can make them slightly differently. So you might be able to identify, just for example, acid producing and consuming materials which are outside of the ore itself. But if you know where they are, you can start to put the acid producing materials inside a stockpile surrounded by acid consuming materials, not to generate an acid drainage problem down the track. These are things actually that industry does think about. Not that it does a particularly good job of articulating that to the general population, but I think the more the industry can think about that and think about the way it handles the waste materials, the more it will take time, but the greater acceptance it will have. And when it comes around to the time of permitting to try and get permission to put new operations or put new operations, or create them and put them into production.
Yes. Now, we've been talking about bridging the gap for
Mm.
the battery metals. So this type of technology, because you're improving the grade of the ore that's coming out of the mine, does it extend the life cycle of these mines because you're able to more efficiently target the higher grades? And does it allow for mines that when we've been bulk mining, does it allow us to go back and say, okay, if we precision mine these same areas, we're going to be able to get more ore out of the same mine area?
Yeah, and so the short answer is yes to all of that. But there are, of course, there are complexities and subtleties to it. Yeah, there are some mines, if you take a risk approach to them, that aren't in production at the moment because the economics are poorly understood, or the risk factors are just too high. One way to mitigate risk is to collect the right information up front, or upstream is a way of thinking about it. So if you can get that information now, then it would be possible to take some resources that we know about. Because remember, it takes a long time to find these things, even in that 10, 15-year time frame. There are a lot of resources which aren't in production, which we know about, which we tend to call stranded assets. I think a key to bridging the supply gap is to go back to those stranded assets. And they're stranded for various reasons. Some are political, access to water, local community and indigenous groups, and that's fine, and they're real concerns. But some are stranded just due purely to a lack of technical data. So you could go back to some of these, not go to buy one on the cheap, for example, that someone doesn't want to prosecute, and just re-prosecute the resource development phase of drilling, and then acquire new data, which is possible to do now, which may not have been possible when the thing was originally drilled out, drill it at a higher density, take the risk out of the economics and putting it into production, and come up with an entirely different mine plan, which takes advantage of the technical ability that you might have to precision mine that. And that would, I've not done the back of the envelope calculation, but I would figure that sort of an approach would release the sorts of things we need into production: copper, nickel, zinc, for example.
Yeah, there's at least two companies here in London that have done exactly that. They've gone back to old mine sites with fresh eyes and new technology, and determined that they're still in fact viable to operate, and they're moving them through, and it's often quicker to take an old mine and bring it back into production than it is to find a brand new one.
Yeah, and if you have that, to bring it back into production or to reopen or whatever, but if you take this approach, then I think you can, whatever the anticipated environmental impacts were the first time round that it was conceived or in production, you could probably bring it back into production, which with much less of a local community and environmental impact. You could bring it back into production with much better ESG credentials, I think, which is also important. I think you can feel a shift in sentiment around Europe and the UK, actually, around bringing these sorts of older mines back into production. There seems to be a dawning realization now that we do need these metals of various types. So the communities, I wouldn't say they're becoming permissive, that would be far too strong a statement, but it seems to be becoming more acceptable now to try and restart this activity in Europe, if you like.
It's not that they're becoming more permissible, but you could have a conversation where before the conversation couldn't happen at all. It was just like, mine, no. And of course, as you saw coming in here first day, we had several of those outside that we had to maneuver our way around in order to get in here. But that's free speech. They're allowed their opinions.
Oh yeah, of course. It's a bit colder this morning, so they went out there.
yeah. It's kind of funny. You think they'd be in favor of global warming because they only show up on warm days. But that's picking on them. That's probably not fair. But hey, what can you do? So we've talked about the role of technology in existing mines, bringing new mines or old mines back to life. When a mine gets shut down, there's always ore left or left back. You call it waste rock, tailings, um, or that's not, necessarily the best to mine, but there's always minerals still left in that ore and left in those tailings. What's the role of technology in the remediation of these old mine sites to as part of the shutdown process that can also extract ore from this waste rock material?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Michael. So the tailings that left behind are, I would put that under the banner of belonging under the ore body knowledge banner, if you like, but in a different guise. So the materials have been moved and dumped somewhere else. We've extracted what we ever extracted from them, but everything that's left over, it's been put in a different place, in a different grain size, very fine grained, of course, into a lake or whatever you want to call it. But it sits there and it has multiple values, actually. And this is another way of potentially closing the gap with access to materials. But there are, I've spoken to John Thompson, who's very well known to the industry, and he's involved in a group called Regeneration, and they're looking at this tailings problem. But to do things with the tailings, it's much like what we've been talking about with precision mining. You need to understand what is in the tailings, and some of these tailings dams, ponds, whatever you want to call them, have been around some of the older mining areas for 100 years at least, and there's no record of what the hell is in them right now. That's a problem because people freak out a bit because they don't know what's in them in the first place. But the other thing is, you want to make a case to prosecute them in some way, then it's very difficult to make an economic case to do something also because you know what the hell's in them. So there's a role here for technology to be able to characterize tailings, and Imdex is actually looking at technologies to do that, just to blow our own trumpet a little bit. But reprocessing tailings, there's three values actually. It may be the case that the tailings contain components, commodities, metals, because some of the older processing plants and processes weren't that efficient. Their recovery might have been 70 or 80%, which means 20 or 30% of the material valuable component is still sitting in the tailings. So if you can recover that, then that may be economic to do that. But there's another value in the material itself, and people are doing research now because tailings are pretty, once it's been through a mining plant, it's a pretty special material actually. And so people like John Thompson and the Regeneration Group are looking at what you can turn tailings into from a construction material. You would have been, I think it's Varley's been talking about using sands from tailings, recovering sand, things like that as a building material. But the tailings themselves, if we put our minds to it, we'd probably be able to transform them into really quite specialized building materials. They'll have certain thermal capacities. We might be able to make insulation panels, bricks that are resilient to losing heat in houses, things like that. So apart from the economic value of what you might get out of when into copper, gold, whatever it is, the material itself, if it can be turned into a valuable construction material, then it has an innate value to it, which again makes it doubly attractive economically to do something with it. And then the third value is, and mining companies, well, I suppose getting better or increasingly fessing up to this, is putting a dollar value on the liability they carry for the tailings dams on their books. So Rio Tinto's one, for example, it currently carries $15 billion. I can't remember if it's US dollars or Australian dollars, doesn't matter. It's a lot of money. But they carry that liability on their balance sheet for the tailings dam. So if you can extract something economic out of it, there's a dollar value. If you can turn it into something valuable, just implicit itself, the tailings materials, that's a value. If you can take it off your balance sheet, that is an absolute dollar for dollar value. And then there are also environmental credits now being spoken about, that you can build environmental credits for remediating these areas. So I suppose that's actually 4 different areas of value for dealing with tailings. Now, I think I find that really fascinating because the mining industry, quite rightly so, has a very poor reputation and record for dealing with tailings. Mount Polley and your part of the world, Canada being one of them, Brazil, etc. But if the industry can really come up with a way that makes money and is a benefit to the balance sheet to go out and start remediating these things, that's a big step in itself, and it will give the industry the credit to play elsewhere to bring new mines into production if they can show that a flipped, a change of personality, if you like, or persona in the general public. I think that will be, because people typically think of technology in mining and in the actual mining process, but if you start to think about it with tailings as well, that opens up a whole new area of endeavor, which could really grow quite large, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yes, and definitely it cleans up the environment.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you're right. These companies are sitting on a lot of liability for environmental liability for these tailings, and there is some value locked in that, but more importantly, it cleans up the environment and it gets a liability off the balance sheet. So you would think it'd be a win-win for everybody. The last area, as far as the technology goes, is in the exploration and development phase of these projects. So we've kind of gone. We started with people that are actually mining. We've gone through the process of how to make them more efficient, and when they're done, how to clean that up. But let's go right to the start in the beginning. How do we make that process more efficient so that we're finding these ore bodies that are mineable more quickly? As there's one thing to have an ore body, but is it going to be economical to mine?
Yeah, that's from one end to the other, as you say. I think that has a couple of dimensions to it as well. I think efficiency in drilling and data acquisition is really important, and this is also time, again, becomes part of the equation. So it takes a long time to find something, to once you've found it, then to define it enough to take the risk out to make the investment decision to turn it into a mine. That process itself can be 5, 6, 7, 8 years long. Does it need to be that long? Often it's that long because to put it in Australia, we root around, if you like, during that process. So, one thing Imdex is very keen on is making that process far more efficient. And efficiency means efficiency in the process of acquiring the data, but also means shortening that time frame. There's simple maths involved here, which people tend to forget about, that if you shorten that process by 2 years, you bring production forward by 2 years, in fact, and the NPV value of that is enormous. It far outweighs the cost of the drilling and data acquisition process itself. So there's speeding that up. There's also collecting, and we call this sort of pushing. There's this book called Upstream, which is an excellent book. It's got nothing to do with mining or mining technology whatsoever, but when you read it, it's directly applicable. You push the data gathering exercise through the resource development stream upstream to that point, and then you collect enough data there to, number one, de-risk the decision to put the mine into operation, to build the mine, if you like, to make that investment. But you collect enough data upstream to allow you to make the best decision about how to design the mine. And we'll go back to where we started, where if you have enough data up front and the data is spatially dense enough and you have enough context, information about the geotechnical, the mineralogical, the rock deportment, structure, fabric, etc., geotechnical risks, then you may be able to design the mine right from the outset in a completely different way, mine it more efficiently, go in with precision mining approach, have less capital expenditure, have a smaller plant, smaller footprint, all of those things. But you cannot do that unless you get that data upstream or you front load the data gathering exercise in that process. There's a fantastic anecdote in that book, Upstream, which some people listening to this will know about, but I'll just repeat it very quickly. There's a couple of people just standing next to a river and a kid comes past drowning, and one of them jumps into the river and pulls the kid out. Then another kid comes past and the other person jumps in and grabs the kid, drags the drowning kid out. Then another one comes in, and then one of the people there's in the river pulling the kid out, and their mate has disappeared. And they said, "Where have you gone?" They said, "I'm going upstream to work out who the hell's throwing the kids in the river." Right. Mining is a bit reactive. Mining is a bit sitting there in a mine operation, pulling kids out of the river and not worrying about who the hell's throwing them in upstream. Right.
That's actually a really good analogy, and somewhere someone's going to think, "Oh yeah, that's Michael Fox throwing the kids in the river upstream." Somehow, I'm going to end up getting blamed for that somewhere. The role of technology. Everyone's always looking for the mega project. They're looking for the big ore deposit that's going to be the big mine. there's often a lot of smaller mines out there that get ignored by the major companies that could still get put into production. So if I understood what you were saying correctly, the technology, if we develop it upstream, we could actually bring some of these borderline projects online more that can get there more effectively, maybe don't have the same life of mine, but extract smaller grades of, well, not smaller grades, but smaller ore bodies effectively and start to solve our gap that way as well.
Oh yeah, and I think the effort to close the gap will need to prosecute whatever we can. It's a bit like decarbonizing. It's not one technology is going to solve that. We'll need anything we can put our hands on. But yes, it should, and I think it will, open deposits which aren't necessarily what you call tier one deposits that majors chase. Of course, it should make smaller deposits more attractive for bigger miners, because even the big mines, you want the long mine life because you can amortize the cost over a long time, and it can live through 3 or 4 commodity price cycles. And once you balance it all out over 40 or 50 years, it sort of doesn't matter. You can still make money over the long term. Smaller mines, that's the worry, right? You just bring it into production and there's a price crash, which being an industry that happens. But if you can go in with much less upfront capital expenditure and a precision mining approach, it even de-risks that problem, which should make some of the smaller deposits attractive to even some of the bigger companies to bring them into production, just to add the materials that we need. I think another driver there is, and we've spoken about geopolitics in the past, is onshoring the supply of these materials. I think will mean that the majors start looking at deposits like that, which are in friendly jurisdictions, and too fine a point on it, which they otherwise may not have looked at in the past, but now maybe they will. And I think, well, if we can reduce the capital, I mean, we can have a certain proportion of our portfolio of metal in friendly short or on short, friend short, I would think that would be pretty attractive at the boardroom.
Yeah, no, definitely. Last but not least, you guys are putting a toe in the waters in our part of the world. I understand you have a new partnership with a group called BRIM that works out of the University of British Columbia.
Yes.
Give a quick overview of what BRIM is and what they do and what your role in this partnership is.
Yeah, so there's 2 groups at the UBC, University of British Columbia. So we're going into a big project with BRIM and the MDRU, both of those. So the MDRU is the Mineral Deposits Research Group, so that's the geoscience side. BRIM is more the mining technology side, but we're working with the pair of them. We're going in with Ideon, which is a Vancouver-based technology company as well. They look at muon mapping of materials. Yet people can ask them what muons are. I'm not going to explain that. But between Ideon, Imdex, and the university, and those 2 specialist schools, and NSERC, the Canadian government entity, we're running $1 million research project over the next 2 years. We can process now. I'm looking for some postdocs. So if you're interested, if there are any postdocs listening about getting involved in the project, please approach the MDRU or get in contact. But it's looking at attaching a dollar value to information. So we've been talking about technology a lot. One of the impediments to the adoption of technology in general, but especially in the mining industry, is that the people developing the technology, including us, including Imdex, including Ideon, and all of the other people that work in the industry, is people know it's a cool idea. They implicitly think it's a good idea, but it has no dollar value attached to it. It's not, there's no, I don't want to call it a business case. Oh, that's too trite. But what is the dollar value of the information delivery at that point in time in whatever it is you're applying it to in the mining operation or upstream of that? Indeed, we do a very poor job of that, and we need it as a suppliers of technology in the industry. We need to be able to attach a dollar value to it, but also the people we're talking to in the resource companies also need to be able to attach a dollar value to it to make a case to adopt it within the mining company as well. And if you're talking about significant changes in workflows and operational parameters, some of the things we've just been talking about in mining, for example, in precision mining, if you can't articulate what dollars are in it, then it's and these sorts of decisions will boil up to CFO, COO, CEO level. If you, at that point, cannot articulate the value of what you're doing in in realistic, well-calculated dollar terms, NPV terms, you're not speaking the same language, and the chances of it being adopted are commensurately less. So there's a crossing the chasm, activation energy, whatever you want to call it. We miss, as an industry, the ability to articulate that well and concisely. And if we did, then I think, companies like Imdex and might be part of the project will be very happy, because that'll help what we do get adopted. But in a more general sense, and this is why we're running it with the university, is for the greater good as well. It will just help the industry be able to change its spots, if you like, and adapt new workflows. Changing a workflow at a mine site is incredibly non-trivial and difficult. And that's why there's often, we say our industry is conservative and reactive, doesn't adapt to change very well. There are reasons for that. There are good reasons for that, because it's just bloody difficult. But I think if we can get to that dollar conversation, then we can start having a better conversation and a better chance of the mining company saying, okay, we'll invest in this and we will change our workflow to stick the benefit, because the benefit is worth this much to us over the next 10 years. Completely different conversation. I regard it as a bit as my swan song in the industry. It's been a bugbear of mine for decades, and finally managed to get this project up with a great university there, UBC. I love UBC. And so really looking forward to getting into this. It's a 2-year-long project. A lot of the resource companies are already asking about it, and if people are listening, want to know more, I'd really encourage them to get in contact, because one of the things the researchers will be doing is looking for data, real world data, to run through the maths and start looking at the decision tree analysis and the conditional probabilities, et cetera, to work out these values. The other thing, as a motivator as part of the project, which uni started already but is going to finish off, is looking at impairments that are announced on the TSX and ASX. They did a little bit of work of this, and there's been a little bit published already out of Brim, John Steen and his students. But their initial conclusions there were 1/3 of impediments were due to a lack of ore body knowledge, a lack of technical data, not due to commodity prices or geopolitical risk, just purely technical data. So we're going to expand that. We're going to fill that out much more, get a much tighter handle on it, and then work out, then that's working for one end, then at the other end, well, if you were to do this and do this and do this, what would that be, the value of that be in dollars? What if you took a technical approach to mining? What's the value, to use the Rio Tinto example? And I'm sure they've done this themselves, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. But what is the value of them from going from a 10-meter bench with 300-ton truck to a 5-meter flitch with a 40-ton electrified truck, picking the eyes out of the ore to hit their pulver blend more efficiently? The value that must be in the hundreds, if not billions of dollars. So.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, I'm sure Rio Tinto isn't prepared to share that information. It'd be pretty proprietary, so it'd be good that the university, whose role is to share a university, goes through those exercises.
Well, we also figured the university might be seen as a bit less invested in the outcomes, so the mining companies might be more willing to talk to them and share some of this information. But if Rio's listening, yes, we would love to. we would love some of that data for the project.
Definitely. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been a good, enlightening conversation. We'll continue to talk about how we are going to fill those gaps, because those gaps do need to be filled. We can't get from A to B, doing things the same way as we have for the last 100 years. It's not going to happen. So again, good to see you, and look forward to chatting again in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks to the listeners.
The Prospector News podcast is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and are not to be taken as investment advice. Listeners need to do their own due diligence and seek advice of a licensed investment advisor.